There was nothing about Ted Bundy that immediately screamed danger. He wasn't some frightening-looking stranger lurking in a dark alley. He was young. He was intelligent. He could be polite, well-dressed, articulate, and, to many people who met him, completely ordinary. And that may have been the most dangerous thing about him, because during the 1970s, Ted Bundy would use that ordinary appearance to get close to women who had no reason to believe they were standing next to a killer. What followed was a trail of disappearances stretching across several American states, hundreds of miles apart. And for years, investigators struggled to understand what connected them. This is the story of Theodore Robert Bundy, not the legend, not the media celebrity he eventually became, but the man behind one of America's most notorious criminal cases. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His childhood was complicated. For years, he was raised believing that his grandparents were his parents too, and that his mother was actually his sister. Eventually, he learned the truth about his family. As he grew older, Bundy developed a reputation for being intelligent and ambitious. He attended the University of Washington and studied psychology. He became involved in politics. He worked on political campaigns. He developed relationships, and eventually, he entered law school in Utah. From the outside, his life looked like the beginning of a successful future. There was nothing obvious that told the people around him that they were looking at someone capable of murder. And that contrast would become one of the defining features of his story. In early 1974, young women began disappearing around Washington state. One of the earliest known victims was 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy, a University of Washington student. On February 1st, she disappeared from her apartment. Her bed had been made. Her belongings were still there. There was blood on her pillow. But Linda was gone. At first, there was no obvious explanation. Then another woman disappeared, and another, and another. Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, Jorgan Hawkins. Young women were vanishing from college campuses, bars, parks, and streets. And there was a disturbing pattern. Many of the victims were young women with long, dark hair, but the police still didn't know who was responsible. Then came a breakthrough. On July 14th, 1974, 2 women disappeared from Lake Sammamish State Park. Their names were Janice Ott and Denise Naslund. Witnesses remembered something unusual. A young man had approached women at the park. He said his name was Ted. He claimed he needed help with his boat because his arm was injured and placed in a sling. It was an ordinary request, the kind of thing most people wouldn't think twice about. But witnesses later gave police a description of the man, and suddenly, investigators had something they could work with. A composite sketch was released. The newspapers published his description, and women began calling police. Some said they had seen him. Others said they had encountered someone matching the description. The killer was no longer completely invisible. He had a face and a name, Ted. Later that year, Bundy moved to Salt Lake City to attend law school at the University of Utah. The disappearances followed. In November 1974, 18-year-old Carol Daronche was approached at a shopping mall by a man claiming to be a police officer. He told her there had been an attempted burglary at the mall. He asked her to come with him. Carol got into his car, but something wasn't right. The man attempted to handcuff her. She fought back, and somehow Carol escaped. That decision saved her life. Later that same night, 17-year-old Deborah Kent disappeared after leaving a school event. She never returned home. Investigators eventually connected the 2 cases, and they began to suspect that the man who had tried to abduct Carol DaRonch, could also be connected to Deborah's disappearance, but they still needed evidence. Then, in August 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol officer named Bob Hayward noticed something suspicious: a tan Volkswagen Beetle. He stopped the vehicle. Inside, police discovered items including handcuffs, a crowbar, an ice pick, and other suspicious equipment. The driver was Ted Bundy, yet the police still didn't have enough to connect him conclusively to the murders. For the moment, Bundy remained free. That would change soon. Carol DaRonch identified him in a police lineup. Bundy was arrested and charged with aggravated kidnapping. In 1976, he was convicted and sentenced to prison. But the kidnapping case was only the beginning. Investigators were now looking much deeper into his past, and what they found was horrifying. Investigators began connecting Bundy to missing women across several states. Some bodies were discovered, others were never recovered. The list continued to grow: Washington, Utah, Colorado, and eventually Florida. Bundy had crossed state lines repeatedly, and that made the investigation extraordinarily difficult. Different police departments were dealing with different disappearances. Different jurisdictions had different evidence. There was no single investigation connecting everything together. And Bundy understood something investigators were only beginning to realize: distance could protect him. In 1977, Bundy was facing murder charges in Colorado. While being held at the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, he was allowed access to the law library. Bundy was representing himself. Then, on June 7th, he jumped from a second-floor window. He disappeared into the mountains. Police launched a massive search. For 6 days, Bundy was missing. Eventually, he was captured and returned to custody. But incredibly, that wasn't the end, because several months later, Bundy escaped again. This time, he had carefully lost weight so that he could squeeze through an opening in the ceiling of his cell. He climbed into the building's ventilation system and disappeared. Authorities did not immediately realize he was gone. By the time they understood what had happened, Bundy had a significant head start. He left Colorado behind and eventually made his way to Florida. January 1978, Tallahassee, Florida State University, and a sorority house called Chi Omega. In the early morning hours of January 15th, Bundy entered the house. Inside were young women who were asleep in their rooms. By the time the attack was over, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy were dead. Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler survived. Another student, Cheryl Thomas, was attacked at a nearby residence. The violence shocked the community. But Bundy wasn't finished. Less than a month later, a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach disappeared from her school in Lake City, Florida. She would become Bundy's final known murder victim. Her body was discovered months later. By this point, Bundy was no longer simply a suspect in a series of disappearances. He was one of the most wanted men in America. On February 15th, 1978, a police officer in Pensacola noticed a suspicious vehicle. The car had stolen plates. The officer pulled it over. The driver resisted. A struggle followed. Eventually, the officer subdued him. At first, the man refused to identify himself, but eventually, his identity became clear. Ted Bundy, the man police had been searching for, the man who had escaped twice, the man connected to murders across multiple states. This time, there would be no escape. Bundy's first major Florida murder trial began in 1979. The case attracted enormous public attention. Bundy was not simply sitting quietly in the courtroom. He represented himself at points. He questioned witnesses. He argued with prosecutors. He appeared confident, and that confidence fascinated the media. But beneath all of it was evidence. Investigators had connected him to the Chi Omega murders through physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and other forensic evidence presented at trial. The prosecution's case ultimately convinced the jury. On July 24, 1979, Ted Bundy was convicted of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lassa Levy and the attempted murders of 3 other women. He was sentenced to death. But there was still another trial. In 1980, Bundy went on trial for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. The evidence again pointed toward him. Witness testimony, physical evidence, and circumstances surrounding Kimberly's disappearance. The jury found him guilty. Once again, he received the death penalty. Bundy was now a convicted murderer facing execution. But even then, he continued fighting to delay his death. For years, appeals and legal proceedings kept the execution from happening. As the end approached, Bundy finally began talking. After years of denying responsibility, he confessed to killing numerous women. He told investigators that he had murdered 30 women. But even that number was not considered definitive. Some investigators believed there were additional victims whose identities were never discovered. And that is one of the darkest aspects of the Bundy case. We may never know exactly how many lives he took. Some families never received answers. Some victims were never found. Some disappearances may forever remain unsolved. The final morning came. Ted Bundy was inside Florida State Prison. Outside, crowds gathered. Inside, preparations were made for his execution. At approximately 7 a.m., Bundy was strapped into the electric chair. He had spent years trying to escape prison, escape conviction, and escape death. This time, there was nowhere left to run. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed by electrocution. He was 42 years old. His reign of terror was finally over. But perhaps the most disturbing part of the story isn't how Bundy died. It's how long people struggled to see what he really was. He didn't always look threatening. He could be charming. He could speak intelligently. He could appear educated and respectable. He could convince people to trust him. And he exploited that trust. That's why the Bundy case became more than the story of one serial killer. It became a warning about appearances. Because evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it sounds intelligent. Sometimes it asks for help. And sometimes the person everyone assumes is incapable of such a thing is exactly the person they should have been watching. Ted Bundy's victims were not characters in a horror story. They were daughters, students, friends, sisters, people with plans for the future. And every time one of their names is remembered, the focus should remain where it belongs, not on the man who killed them, but on the lives he took away. Because the darkest legacy of Ted Bundy isn't the legend surrounding his name. It's the empty spaces he left behind.